Gig economy.
Gig economy.
The gig economy.
The gig economy.
The gig economy.
The gig economy.
Here's a number that should terrify anyone in the gig economy. In 2024, 85% more people applied to drive for Uber than in 2019. Sounds good, right? Except during that exact same period, approval rates dropped from 71% to 28%, and the drivers who did get approved are earning 40% less than they were 5 years ago. But here's what I found that explains all of this. Uber has a patent, US 1045799B2, for an AI system that detects how financially desperate you are and pays you less the more desperate it determines you've become. This isn't gig economy growing pains. This is engineered saturation. They flooded the market on purpose, and now they're managing the decline. And it gets so much worse. And to understand just how deliberate this strategy is, we need to go back to 2013, when none of this was an accident. Today, the gig economy is massive. 36% of American workers have done gig work according to 2024 Pew Research data. There are 1.7 million active Uber drivers in the US alone. And here's the thing, 78% of gig workers rely on it as their primary income, not as a side hustle like the companies advertise. This is a $387 billion market, and everyone knows conditions have gotten worse. Drivers complain about low pay. The companies claim they're just trying to stay profitable after years of losses. The mainstream narrative says this is just market forces, supply and demand at work. If you don't like it, get a different job. These are independent contractors choosing flexibility. Companies need to be profitable. But what most people haven't noticed is that this didn't happen by accident, and it didn't happen because of market forces. In 2013, these companies made a very specific choice, and every worker complaint you've heard since then has been part of the plan. If you're finding this useful, consider subscribing. We break down systems like this every week. Here's how traditional employment used to work. An employer posts a job, hires workers, pays wages, provides benefits. Workers get minimum wage protection, overtime pay, unemployment insurance. There's a clear employer-employee relationship with legal protections. The gig platform model completely rewired this. The platform creates a marketplace where workers become independent contractors. No minimum wage, no benefits, no protections. The platform takes 25 to 40% commission on every single transaction. And here's the key. An algorithm controls who gets work, how much they earn, and what information they can see before accepting a job. This wasn't accidental. This was a three-phase strategy executed with surgical precision. Phase 1 ran from 2013 to 2017. Subsidized flooding. Venture capital firms, SoftBank alone, invested $11 billion into Uber, funded artificially high pay rates. Uber drivers in major cities could make $35 per hour. The goal wasn't sustainability. The goal was to flood the market with workers, create dependency, and eliminate competition from traditional taxi services. Phase 2, from 2017 to 2020, was dependency lock-in. Workers quit traditional jobs for gig work. They bought vehicles and equipment specifically for these platforms. They built their entire financial lives around the earnings they were promised. And during this phase, the platforms executed massive regulatory capture, spending $200 million on California's Prop 22 alone, the most expensive ballot measure in state history. Phase 3 started in 2020 and continues today, systematic extraction. Pay rates were cut by 30 to 40% across all platforms. They removed transparency. You can't see the full payment before accepting a job anymore. They created worker surplus to eliminate any bargaining power. And they use algorithm opacity to hide how decisions are actually made. Let me be clear about what algorithm opacity means. The platforms won't reveal how pay is calculated. Rates change based on hidden factors they call dynamic pricing. They combine multiple orders to pay you less per delivery, something called batch manipulation. And if you reject too many low-paying orders, they lower your acceptance rate score and punish you with worse offers. Here's the insight that explains everything. This wasn't a business that lost its way. This was a business executing exactly the plan it always had. The entire model depends on getting workers dependent, then extracting value once they can't leave. And that patent I mentioned, that's not the only one. Keep that in mind. We're coming back to just how many systems they've built to exploit desperation. So let's talk about who's really winning from this extraction and who's paying the price. While driver pay dropped 40%, Uber's stock price rose 120%. SoftBank and other venture capital firms recovered their investments through IPOs. Uber's CEO Dara Khosrowshahi made $24 million in 2023 alone. And the platform take rate, the percentage they keep from each transaction, increased from 25% to somewhere between 35 and 40%. Meanwhile, here's who's losing. Veteran drivers who invested in vehicles based on 2019 earning projections. Single mothers who were promised flexibility and are now trapped earning poverty wages. Immigrants whose language barriers prevent them from transitioning to other work. Disabled workers for whom gig work was one of the few accessible options and who now earn below survival rates. Let me show you the numbers. In 2019, an Uber driver in Los Angeles averaged $25 per hour after expenses. In 2024, that same driver, same city, same hours, makes $11 per hour. That's a 56% pay cut in just 5 years. But here's what's truly insane about this. Consumer prices went up 22% during that same period. So riders are paying more, drivers are getting less. Where did that money go? It went to shareholders. The platform commission went from 25% to 38% on average. They're extracting from both sides of the market. And remember those approval rates? In 2019, 71% of applicants were approved to drive. In 2024, only 28% get approved. If there's such a massive driver shortage like they claim, why are they rejecting 72% of people who want to work? Because they're creating artificial scarcity to justify the low pay. But it gets worse. They're not just cutting pay, they're hiding what you'll earn until after you accept the job. In 2022, DoorDash removed the feature that showed full payment up front. Now you're gambling on every single delivery. You might accept what looks like a $7 delivery and discover it's actually $4 after you've already picked up the food. This isn't transparency. This is a forced lottery where the house always wins. Think about the information inequality here. The platform knows the customer tip, the exact distance, current traffic conditions, and delivery difficulty. The driver sees a partial payment estimate and a rough location. You have 30 seconds to accept or reject, or the algorithm punishes you. It's perfect information asymmetry designed to benefit the platform. Let me tell you about Maria. She's a single mother in Phoenix who bought a $28,000 hybrid specifically for Uber in 2019, based on the earning projections Uber's own recruitment materials showed her. She now makes $320 per week, working 45 hours. Her car payment is $480 per month. She's trapped in debt. She can't sell the car because she's underwater on the loan. She can't quit because no other job in her area covers her bills with her schedule constraints. This is exactly as designed, but it gets worse. Remember that patent for desperation detection? That's just one of 5 patents Uber has filed for algorithmic worker control. Patent US 20170178125A1 describes a system that creates honeymoon periods for new drivers, intentionally paying them more for exactly 90 days, then dropping their rates. Why would they design this? Because it creates permanent worker churn. You get excited about the good pay, you quit your other job, you buy equipment, you tell your friends to sign up, then day 91 hits, and your earnings drop 35%. But now, you're stuck. The data confirms this. New drivers in their first 90 days average $22 per hour. Veteran drivers with more than a year of experience average $13 per hour. That's a 41% pay cut for loyalty. The platforms actively want you to quit after 3 months because it prevents workers from organizing or developing institutional knowledge about how to maximize earnings. If this is making you angry, hit that like button. It tells YouTube to show this to more people who need to see it. Now, some of you are thinking, just quit and get a real job. I get it, but here's why that's not realistic for most drivers. First, having gig work on your resume is actually a red flag for traditional employers. They see it as a sign of instability or inability to hold conventional employment. Second, many drivers are immigrants, disabled, caregivers, or have criminal records. Gig work was the only accessible option. Traditional employers wouldn't hire them. Third, and this is key, they've already invested $20,000 to $40,000 in vehicles, insurance, commercial plates, and equipment. You can't just walk away from that debt. That's the trap. But it gets worse. In 2023, Uber and Lyft started pushing drivers to buy electric vehicles, offering special clean air bonuses of an extra $1 to $1.50 per ride. Sounds good, right? Environmental responsibility plus extra income. Except those bonuses disappeared after 6 months. And now thousands of drivers are stuck with $35,000 to $45,000 electric vehicle loans, earning the same low rates as everyone else. The gas savings they were promised evaporated because electricity costs rose 40% in many markets between 2022 and 2024. They engineered a debt trap disguised as environmentalism. The numbers are staggering. The average EV purchased by gig drivers costs $38,000. Average monthly payment, $520. The clean air bonuses lasted exactly 6 months before being eliminated. And in California alone, over 4,200 drivers are now underwater on EV loans. They can't sell because the used EV market collapsed in 2023. They can't afford the payments on current pay rates. They're trapped. Here's what makes this infuriating. This isn't inevitable. In 2021, the UK Supreme Court ruled that Uber drivers are employees, entitled to minimum wage, holiday pay, and pension contributions. Uber fought this ruling for 5 years, spending millions on legal fees and lobbying. And when they lost, they didn't leave the UK market. They absorbed the costs and continued operating. You know why? Because they're already monopolized there. Riders have no viable alternative. Black cabs are too expensive, and Uber crushed most of the competition. This proves they can afford to pay fairly. They just choose not to in markets where they don't have to. A UK Uber driver today earns a minimum of $12.50 per hour. That's about $16 US dollars, plus benefits, holiday pay, and pension contributions. A US Uber driver averages $11 per hour with 0 benefits and 0 protections. Same company, same app, different country. This is a choice, not an economic necessity. Remember those venture capital investments I mentioned earlier? SoftBank didn't invest $11 billion in Uber expecting them to pay workers fairly forever. They invested expecting exactly this outcome: flood the market, establish monopoly, cut costs, extract profits. This was the business plan from day one. Worker exploitation isn't a bug in the system. It's the core product. This isn't just about rideshare. This is the blueprint for the entire platform economy. Airbnb did it to housing, flooded cities with short-term rentals, drove up rents, then extracted profits from both hosts and guests. Amazon Flex is doing it to package delivery. TaskRabbit did it to handyman work. Instacart did it to grocery shopping. The formula is identical every single time. Use venture capital money to subsidize and flood the market. Establish dependency. Cut costs once workers are trapped. Block regulation through massive lobbying campaigns. For 80 years, workers had one fundamental advantage: scarcity. If you quit your job, your employer struggled to replace you quickly, so they had to negotiate and offer competitive wages. But platforms engineered surplus. There are always 10 people waiting to replace you. You're not a worker with leverage. You're an inventory unit that can be swapped out instantly, and the regulatory capture is complete. They spent $200 million on Prop 22 in California. That's more money than both candidates spent on the entire governor's race that year. They didn't just win the vote. They literally wrote the law themselves. Prop 22 requires a 7/8 legislative supermajority to overturn. They made themselves functionally immune to democratic accountability. But it gets worse on a systemic level. This model is now spreading to industries you think are safe. Hospital systems in Texas and Florida are testing gig nursing models. Law firms are experimenting with contract attorneys paid per brief rather than salaries. Even software engineering is seeing fractional developers hired project by project with no benefits. The gig model isn't staying contained in delivery and rideshare. It's coming for every profession where companies can engineer a labor surplus. You might say, can't the government just force employee classification? Here's the problem. Even if they do, these companies have already planned for it. Uber's internal documents from 2022, leaked to Bloomberg, show detailed automation timelines. They expect fully autonomous vehicle fleets operational in major markets by 2028. They're not trying to sustain gig work forever. They're managing a 5-year extraction period before automation eliminates most of these jobs entirely. So here's the reality no one wants to say out loud. There is no good ending here. Even in the best case scenario, where workers somehow force employee classification, win minimum wage protections, and get benefits, they'll be fighting for jobs that won't exist in 5 years. The platforms have filed patents for autonomous delivery robots. Uber's invested $4 billion in self-driving technology. They're not trying to make gig work sustainable. They're managing its obsolescence. Remember that paradox we started with? More applicants, fewer approvals, lower pay? It never made sense as a labor shortage, but it makes perfect sense as managed decline. They need just enough workers to cover demand until the robots are ready, not one worker more. The cruelest irony? Workers are fighting for the right to be called employees of companies actively engineering their replacement. It's like fighting for a promotion on the Titanic. You might win the argument, but the ship is still sinking. This is what late-stage platform capitalism looks like. Companies get rewarded for creating dependency, extracting value, and then automating away the humans who built their entire business. and the market calls it innovation. The gig economy isn't saturated because too many people joined. It's saturated because that was always the plan. Flood the market, drop the pay, manage the decline, automate the future. The workers were never the product. They were the prototype. If you want to understand how this connects to the broader erosion of worker protections, check out my video on right-to-work laws where you'll see the same playbook used for decades. If this opened your eyes to how these systems actually work, don't forget to like and subscribe. We break down how money and power actually work every week, because understanding the game is the first step to not getting played.